This week on the Nonprofit Newsfeed, my name is George Weiner, the Chief Whaler of Whole Whale, and we have Nick Azoulay, Digital Strategist at Whole Whale, and we're here to geek out about nonprofit news as we see it, as we find it. Nick, how's it going?
It is going great, George. Good as always to be back. Our first story that we want to talk about today is an update on the Nonprofit Wellness Index, which, George, we're happy to say has reported its best month since its inception. We're only really working with 4 months here, George, but we saw a significant rebound from the metrics we were seeing in July. For our listeners, again, the Nonprofit Wellness Index measures things like donation activity proxied by ad spend on platforms, and also looks at churn in the job sector, nonprofit job and volunteer sector, pulling in data from Idealist, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, etc., and it also includes layoff data. So, George, we saw a really good turn from the trends you were seeing the past couple months. What does this mean for the sector? Is this, again, just a function of kind of run of the mill seasonal changes, right? End of the fiscal year, beginning of the new year for many organizations, or is this something broader?
Yeah, we're learning honestly as we go. But one of the things we definitely saw in the data was a spike in jobs posted, particularly on Glassdoor for nonprofits, and also a definite uptick in sort of donation, charity, nonprofit ad spends on Facebook, Meta. And so that picked up in the middle of the month. And we can see that actually go up and down. So you can see these data at nonprofitwellnessindex.org. And of course, this is both a sort of absolute score based on a weighted value, and then also a relative score based on all of the months we have tracked. As you mentioned, we only started just before the summer, but last in July was brutal. It was all the numbers looked terrible, jobs were down. And so we're starting to see that pick up in August. Obviously, there's seasonality here as well, but we are actually seeing actual numbers start to pick up. So hopefully that means that things will continue in that direction as we move into September. So just, a bit of decent news. We also will adjust this historically, retroactively, as we get job loss data. So we track that, and that's downward pressure on things for the industry. So we actually didn't record any job losses. They weren't publicly recorded in the sources that we looked at for August, but those are the numbers we are seeing.
Thanks, George. Always good to keep an eye on that. Again, as far as we know, this is kind of the broadest and most up-to-date metric of its kind, tracking the nonprofit sector. That's why we made it. So really important to keep an eye on this over the next couple months and see how things shape up. George, I want to quickly, before we get into some other stories, divert to a call out that we want to make for our listeners specifically. This is about Google for Nonprofits, the Google for Nonprofits workspace expanding to offer AI credits for nonprofit organizations enrolled in the Google for Nonprofits program. George, many organizations are probably already familiar with the Google Ad Grant program. It's free advertising money for nonprofit organizations. But now we are seeing them providing credits for using the AI in workspace tools. Those include tools like Gemini, Notebook LM. But George, other really useful tools such as Google for Sheets, Vio, the video tool. So for George, this is a high quantity of credits and usage ability for nonprofit organizations that qualify, that potentially makes these the best kind of free tools in their class for many organizations.
Yeah. For another perspective on it, let's say you were going to pay for those types of tools from third parties, say OpenAI or others that have built on the image, video, research creations. These are all tools that are running like $20 per user per month to $200 per user per month. And honestly, you can satisfy most of those tools with the Google AI nonprofit workplace integration. So Notebook LM, as you mentioned, Gemini.google.com. That's just ChatGPT. But what nonprofits don't realize is that you can get access to that for free when you go through your Google for Nonprofits account. And I equate it similar to the Google Ad Grant. Like that thing's been around since 2003 and is still wildly underutilized for the value that provides. And I see this in that vein as one of the biggest in-kind corporate gifts to nonprofits that you should be leveraging. So before you go off and you're like listening to this, like, we're about to pay for all of these seats on this platform, like, start with the free stuff. Yes, it takes a little bit of configuration, but they all do. And by the way, from the security standpoint, you're already trusting them with all of your files and all of your emails, and it's covered under that business agreement, that service level agreement that covers all of your data already. So it is not actually being used to train on you. And I see a little downside. That's exactly why we're running a cohort coming up for only a handful of organizations. It's filling up pretty quickly to train folks on how to maximize this tool. We wrote the article. You can find out how to get access and start to leverage these things. But just for 2 seconds, realize that you could take all of your program reports, shove them into a tool like Notebook LM, which can take in massive amounts of documents, and say, hey, give me a board report summary for this. And click one button and tell it to make a podcast episode of all of your program work from the year, and send your board not just another thump factor document, but an actual podcast created to help them understand what's going on at your organization. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many great use cases.
Yeah, George, I think Notebook LM is actually my favorite AI tool because I think it gets
Yeah.
slept on.
Yeah.
Really, what it allows you to do is create with no understanding of any, you don't have to understand a single thing about AI, create a database that you can locally interact with, right? And it's a native Google tool. So you could just shove in all your Google Slides, your Google Excel files, your Google Docs into a folder, click yes, Notebook LM, boom. Chat with half your Google Drive if you want to. It's a powerful tool, and it just one of many. So if you're a nonprofit that has not yet explored that route, you should do it. All right, George. This is a little bit of a complex one. So it comes from Marketplace. It's been reported elsewhere, and we want to talk a little bit about ESG. It stands for environmental, social, and governance, and it's kind of a corporate ideal of making our corporate investments a little bit more sustainable, perhaps a little bit more rights friendly, promote good governance, that kind of thing. And George, all of those are apparently bad news to the world's worst people. So Texas is actually suing corporations for ESG. It began with a legislative crackdown in 2021, and it barred state entities working with firms seen as boycotting oil and gas. And George, this is kind of dovetails into the whole like conservative, like legal think tank Federalist Society world, where you have like the Koch network and Leonard Leo are really kind of fueling this anti ESG movement. But George, there's actually lawsuits right now by the state of Texas to try to prevent these companies from implementing ESG. Yeah, it's a very complicated legal and corporate governance debacle, but I think the key takeaway here, George, is that the assumption that everyone would be on board with ESG, making the world safer, healthier, and more sustainable is in fact not the case. And there's now a level of risk for corporations doing that. And I think remains to be seen rather whether this could have a chilling effect.
Yeah, the piece about this that was interesting is the following the dark money, and I think the Marketplace and the Make Me Smart podcast did a fantastic job of mapping out how that dark money from a lot of oil and gas and other conservative investments funnel through essentially these nonprofits and then lead to the types of think tank pressure that these legislators then rely on. On the surface of it, it's kind of funny because I have actually not been a fan of ESG because it is too broad and effectively trying to come up with some utilitarian rating that weighs like governance in part against the environment, and like those are just two different conversations completely. Like I get governance matters and how you want to see the world from a social justice lens, but like I have always had an issue with that bizarre type of accounting that would let a company destroy the environment, but as long as they had great governance, that would be okay. So in part, I'm like, I think it is want for a better organization to it, but also like you're talking about the freedom of a company to choose and categorize their investments as they see fit. And it's hard to argue that if natural disasters devastate your sector, devastate your local area, destroy your ability to insure buildings, the market's going to work eventually, and it's going to not really care how much you argue against environmental labels. Like, it's just going to destroy your capital because you can't get insurance. Like, that is a thing that's only going to increase. So, you can put your head in the sand, but the tide is rising, literally and figuratively. So, okay, Texas legislators, like, you can follow that only to a certain extent, but the job of capital markets is to make money. And you can't make money if you can't insure things, and you can't make money if you get wiped out by every single seasonal extreme weather event.
Yeah. No, George, I definitely agree. All right, George, this last one we can cover super quickly. It comes from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, but I talk about Candid's 2025 nonprofit compensation report, which George found that women nonprofit CEOs still earn less than their male counterparts across organization sizes, with women leading most small nonprofits but representing less than one third of CEOs of organizations over 50 million. This is a trend that's existed. I think every year we talk about this particular report. But just want to kind of call out that even as things like ESG, which I think the three-letter acronym is triggering for people because it kind of rhymes or it seems similar to DEI, and people seem to don't like that anymore. But there are persistent equity issues in the space. This is just another data point in that achieving that parity, or at least even a little bit more equity, I think would go a long way.
Yeah, that's super interesting. The report that less than one third of CEOs at organizations with budgets over 50 million are led by women. So, yeah, it's still a road to go, even in the sector that has supported DEI and tried to work at it. So, like, now the pendulum's going to swing back. Was one third the high watermark, and we're like, well, good thing we don't have to care about any sort of even basic gender diversity in the leadership of, maybe it's unfair to say progressive organizations because this is a nonprofit broad umbrella. It's Big Tent. So I think there's a little bit of nuance that could be impact inside of this rather than being like, look, you're failing progressives even when you're trying. Like, I don't know if I read it that way.
Yeah, right. Like nonprofit includes hospitals and all the other things that are technically nonprofits, right? But not
It includes all
necessarily
those
are.
think tanks funded by oil companies that are actively getting rid of ESG and any environmental
Right.
ratings.
That is true. That's true. So yeah, but nonetheless, still important to call out, of course. All right, George, we have to finish with a joke, and I got one for you, George. What does the nonprofit fundraiser drink when they get sick?
I don't know. It seems rather specific.
A little bit of charity with honey.
Charity with honey. All right. It's not
Charity.
bad. Okay. Yeah. Get your flu shots, everybody.
'Tis the season.
All right, Nick. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, George.